I want to send out heartfelt greetings to everybody and welcome you to the return of Wine Foundry Wednesday. We're excited to welcome you back. And if you're familiar with the previous approach to Wine Foundry Wednesday, you'll notice a little shift in intent. Instead of filling the space between your ears with lots of useless and pointless knowledge, we're narrowing the scope. We're going to step away from a wide range of unhelpful details, and now the lack of informative information will be focused and targeted. Jokes aside, we know your time's valuable, right? So toward that end, sessions are going to be limited to 30 minutes. And each month, we'll walk you through a handful of content blocks lasting 5 or 6 minutes each. The aim to keep you informed and abreast of dealings around the winery relevant to your wine. For those who don't know, my name is Stuart Ake, and I'm joined by our Director of Winemaking, Patrick Saboe. If you haven't met Patrick in person due to the COVID era, all things related to winemaking sit under Patrick's umbrella. And while he's kind of perched upon the winemaking throne, Patrick's not a one-man band. He has a superb and experienced team in the cellar of about a dozen folks whose boots on the ground are there to ensure your wine and barrels are well tended. By example, tomorrow, one of our winemakers, Paco, will be pulling various barrel samples from the new vintage, which the team will taste blind. The intent with that is we calibrate palates and see how the wines are progressing as they finish up a bacterial activity called malolactic conversion. So we do this on Thursday. So it's this one tomorrow is called Third Thursday Tastings. So tonight, we're going to recap the 2022 vintage and then take a dive into rosé. We'll also discuss to-dos on your part and toss in a little quiz. And at the end of each section, we'll take questions. And at the end of the complete session, we'll grab questions, I guess, not related to specifically to tonight's content. The idea here is we're going to get some 100 level class. If you remember kind of like from the college era, we'll have some 100 level class, and then we'll also take it up to the 200 level so we can kind of stretch your knowledge just a bit. So with that, 2022 recap. Each vintage kind of has its own character and quirks. For example, 2010 and 2011 featured really chilly temperatures, which translated to more restrained interpretations. I guess with many of the reds kind of featuring like a little herbaceous note. Warmer vintages like 2013 or 2018, on the other hand, were rich and round. Patrick, knowing that each vintage is its own thing, like in your words, what are the elements which make 2022, if you will? If you could kind of jump in with that.
Sure, thanks to as you mentioned, each vintage has its own set of conditions. We happen to be in the most stable, or one of the most stable conditions, weather regions in the world in our lifetime. So most vintages are very consistent. There are some particulars about each one that can kind of shape and form the vintage. 22 was mostly a moderate summer. We had nice warm days. We had very little spikes through the majority of the year, and we had no rain to speak of, unfortunately, early on. But certainly when it mattered, it was very dry and nice warm days and cool evenings, as we would expect, and I've come to love and appreciate about it. Late in the harvest, it did, as it got closer to harvest, we did have a surge of heat that was very, very a powerful surge, triple digits for a solid week and a half. And so some of the things, the fruit that was ready to go, what it did was to kind of condense the vintage down into a slightly faster and things coming in together at the same time. It made it more difficult logistically, quite frankly, to execute because of the condensed nature of it. Normally, it comes in Some vintages, like 19, was very a genteel kind of vintage, and everything was slow and steady, and we had plenty of time, and it wasn't a seemingly an over rush. This vintage was not that. This was a fast and furious early on. There were a number of things, thankfully, that were able to make it through the heat wave. Some things needed to be picked because they couldn't go any farther, and really, it was time. And then some of the Cabernet especially of the vines that were in the, say, north of 10 years, 15, 20 old, were able to withstand the heat and kind of kept your head down and waited till after that heat we were able to do it. So we did have a nice, we did have some break of the Cabernet, but we were picking Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon on the same day sometimes. And so it made it for a challenge, mostly on logistics of the facility and trying to balance all that. But luckily we have an amazing facility with lots of different size tanks and hot and cold to all the tanks. And so that gives us quite a bit of flexibility to be able to utilize, particularly in an event like this harvest, where we really needed to be able to expedite things sometimes, particularly on the early turn, like when you're, and to use the restaurant analogy, if everyone wants to eat at 7 o'clock, it makes for a difficult challenge to try to get through the whole evening as opposed to some people came early and some people came late. So but it's not impossible. If you have enough tables, you're able to accommodate everyone. So it's similar with that in the wine world. And we have, 60 tanks behind me. And so we were able to make it through. That being said, it was a challenge. It was not easy, nor it never is.
So you talk about the heat spike. How does, in your opinion, how does the heat spike translate into wine? Like, do people taste it, or is it more of a thing that we talk about, but consumers can't really notice it? What are your opinions? And just talk about the heat spike and how it will translate.
So, yeah, the heat definitely has an impact on, and it expedites the ripening of the fruit, and so it makes things faster, of course. But also, moreover, I think the most important part is the profile of the fruit that it ripens. And so you have a slightly riper quality and character to the flavors than you would, as opposed to then perhaps I picked it at 24 bricks as opposed to 27 bricks or something like that. And so for Cabernet and for red wines particularly, I think it has a big thing. Now we have the flexibility in the U.S. and overall to be able to adjust the ferments as needed. So regardless of what we start with, I'm able to dial back. Like, for example, just because we might pick at a slightly higher sugar doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to end up with more alcohol, because I'm able to ameliorate back to the level of alcohol that I want. So we still adjust as necessary. It might just take a little bit more adjusting, perhaps, on, generally when you have, high heat, you're going to have lower acid. However, this happens so quickly and kind of late that it really, the wines actually maintain their acidity pretty well. The fruit did, even though the sugar levels were higher. So we had to be able to ameliorate back to get the desired alcohol levels, but I didn't have to add a lot of acid that I might expect. Like if you make wine in Texas or other hot regions, you have to add a lot of water and a whole lot of acid. So we didn't actually have we actually had a reasonably high acid vintage. So we did have to add some water to be able to accommodate the additional sugar. So it's more of a profile thing than anything else. And I think unless you've tried wines at different bricks levels going into it, it's difficult to say, this is exactly what it tastes like. They're more subtle nuances than overt, oh my God, this is totally different. So it's not all raisin qualities or not, and so forth. And so, I think you'll find that the wines from 22 are still rich and bold wines generally, especially for the reds. And I think for New World palates, 22 is an excellent vintage.
So can we just talk about vintage in general then? So, and with that in mind, what do you think? Because I used to read a lot of wine periodicals, and they would kind of talk about, they would rate vintages or whatever. So and sometimes I'd be scratching my head, I have a very different interpretation. What are some, what do you think just speaking broad strokes, misunderstandings about vintage, if you will, or not but just how people talk about it? Sorry for like phrasing it poorly, but I hope that makes kind
No,
of
I think the broad stroke was the correct way to talk about it. This is the unfortunate part about what we do as people. We tend to make broad strokes with things. Like, Burgundy is a 97, as if all wines from Burgundy from this vintage was a 97. And that's not the case at all. There's going to be variance within every vintage, within every region. Napa, and sorry for all the Frenchies on the line here, you'll have to hold your ears tight. But Napa is the best place in the world in our lifetime to grow Bordeaux varieties, probably to grow most fruit in general, but certainly to grow Bordeaux varieties. It's not in Bordeaux, although they won't like to hear that. It's mostly due to the variance in Bordeaux and or other regions where they have way more vintage variance. Now, if your goal is variation and variability, then elsewhere is the place to be. But in Napa and in Northern California in general, you're not getting variability. You're getting excellent growing conditions year after year after year after year. Really, the last 10 vintages, well, since 12, have been just stunning vintages by most people's standards. And you are looking at near perfect conditions where, again, super dry, warm days, cool evenings, the same thing tomorrow, and over and over and over again for about 5-6 months in a row. And so normally the vintage in most regions of the world has a big portion to do with. And so I understand, I appreciate people referring to, I'd say in California, it's less appropriate in general to refer to vintage, just because there are plenty of things that could change throughout vintages. And there are definitely differences, but they're more subtle over here. Whereas in Oregon or in Burgundy or in places like that, they are significantly more varied. And so you really need to focus on the vintage. So I do think vintage is important. However, I don't think broad stroking vintage is the way to go. And so we always do this. We say or it's the same thing for all wines from Napa are amazing. And that's a really generous comment. It's just not true though. And so I'd say the majority of wines from Napa are of exceptional quality. Are all of them amazing? Well, it depends on the judge, of course. But it's just not. I think it's too broad stroked, and I think this is it's a shortcoming of us as humans. We tend to paint this as all the way, all this thing is this, or all this guy is a good guy or a bad guy, and it's way more subtle than that. And so I think that the thing that's misunderstood about that is that even within an excellent vintage, even when you pull up wine speculators, the dictators' notes on the vintage, the fact that it says 97 does not mean that all wines from that vintage will be 97. You're guaranteed success regardless of what you choose. Yeah, it's unfortunate that that's not as easy as that. And so I think that's the shortcoming in our brains, is that we tend to group things all together. Like, again, this block of things or this region or this year only does this or that. And there's quite a bit of subtleties throughout, and sometimes significantly. And so I think I would suggest that you be careful not to be careful not to use too much broad strokes and to over generalize when you're referring to things.
I do it all the time. So, but we've also been in a stretch of the last 10 vintages, which have been outstanding. Switching to, I'm going to kind of bring up and kind of talk about vintage by the numbers, if you will here, if I can somehow help you see this. All right, so the vintage by the numbers. Our first grapes came in on August 8th, some Sauvignon Blanc, and then some Cab Sauv came in. The last grapes are on October 26th. Here's where things get a little wacky. 679 tons of grape, a record at the Wine Foundry. And that's everyone who brings their grapes here, including our production for your barrels and other people who use our facility. But 679 tons, which equates to a whopping 1,697 barrels of wine. 30 grape varietals passed through the doors this year, and 205 separate lots of grapes. That's a lot of grapes. Those are separate lots of grapes. So, and then here are the grape varietals. From Albarino, Alicante Bouschet, Barbera, Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Carignan, Chardonnay, Gewurz, Grenache Koshu, really fun grape. Patrick, I'm losing my voice. Do you want to kind of jump in and take over row number 2?
Yeah, we have Malbec, and then there's several varieties like Mourvedre that have multiple names. Mataro in Spain, actually Monastrell as well. So you have Monastrell or Mataro or Mourvedre, Merlot and Nebbiolo. You have PV, as we like to call Petit Verdot, Petit Syrah, and Pinot Gris. You have Pinot. When people say Pinot, they usually mean Pinot Noir, of course. Zen and Primitivo are cousins of the same Croatian grape. Roussanne is a yummy white Rhone grape. Sangio, everyone knows, I think, Sauv Blanc, and Semillon is a little less known, but so another wonderful Bordeaux white grape. Syrah. Tannat is also not very well known, and the only one of these grapes, or of these names here, that is a palindrome. So you can look that up if you don't know that. And so Tempranillo Verdejo is a super yummy white grape, and Viognier, and as I said, Zen is Primitivo's cousin.
Hey, and I know this brevity is not always either of our strong points, but do you think anything was lost when your professor, Carol Meredith, kind of popped the bubble on Primitivo and Zinfandel? And, they're genetically, they're the same grape.
We had hoped for an American grape.
Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts?
We had hoped for an American grape, and that was quickly dashed by my esteemed former professor, Dr. Meredith. She's a geneticist, of course, and used her skills and knowledge to find out that this species, so none of all those wine varieties that we just mentioned are all from the same species, the Vitis vinifera, which is the majority of the wines, or if not all the wines that you're enjoying on a regular basis, is from that species. And so we do have Americans do have a species in the game. It's just below ground. And so all those varieties are grafted onto American rootstocks, North American rootstocks, that are usually a combination of 2 different rootstocks for a couple of different reasons, but mostly for tolerance purposes. All those vines are used to grew up here for thousands and thousands of years, conditions of like phylloxera and nematodes and drought and salt tolerance and moisture tolerance, or high or low metals and things like that. There's a number of things that that the vine, they're on their own roots, they don't do so well, but with grafted they do quite well. So we have American species, it's just not the fruit that we're drinking. So sadly, Zinfandel is not American.
If anybody has any questions about specifically related to the vintage, please chime in below, and then we will I'll probably read it out, because my technology skills, I would flub it trying to bring you online. But if anybody has a question, please chime in. And while we're doing that, it's time for your quiz. Dun, 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 dun. All right. Here we go. We're going to be moving into a process called extended maceration. So extended maceration refers to the red wine technique of A, keeping skins in contact with juice after fermentation. B, fermenting wine at cool temperatures to highlight bright berry notes. A lot of drama right there as I was hitting the wrong button. Timing how long wine is felt in the mouth after swallowing. Or D, extended maceration is fermenting in open top vessels to increase oxidation and highlight secondary and tertiary aromatics and flavors. So a lot of people are chiming in with answer E, which is all of the above. And I see some people chiming in like Terry with F, which is none of the above. Oh, sorry, I am nearsighted. A lot of people chiming in with answer A. Patrick, drum roll, please. And the big reveal, Dr. Saboe. Dun, 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 dun.
Yes, the answer is definitely A. You are right. Good job, everyone.
So
It's
what's the
keeping skins in contact after the fermentation.
so, but why do you do it? What is, and you can go into, of course, we only have a few minutes, but if you want to take it up to chemistry level, let's go for it.
All right. So the main reason to do it is the tannins on a young wine generally are more on the front and sides of the palate. So it's really very kind of front forward. So what I'm trying to do is that early on the fermentation, or just even right after the fermentation, most of the tannins are kind of single monomer, molecules. And so what happens is polymerization is that these things link together and they form these longer chain molecules that affect the sides and the back of your palate. It's kind of like pushing the wine a bit further back into the palate. It makes the wine a little bit rounder and the wine chewier, and the palate feels more complete across the palate. And so there's a maximum though. It can reach a level of maximum tannin extraction, and then it can drop down. So it's about timing, and so you have to. It only comes through experience, and so you have to. I've tried a number of different things and do it this way and do it that way. I'd be able to do things correctly. One of my favorite old sayings from that I remember, I think it was credited to Dean Martin, but of course, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from poor judgment. And so the way to figure out how to do something is to try it and to probably fail, and then understand why you didn't get the amount of tannins and mouthfeel and profile you were looking for. So sadly, early on in my career, I had to learn that the hard way. And so it's a matter of paying attention and evaluating. And fortunately for us, science is catching up to just using your gut instinct and judgment. So there's new ways now to monitor and to quantify things in the wine. So the compounds are called phenolic compounds, tannins, and other things that contribute to the way the wine feels in your palate. And so there are ways of just now kind of coming out to monitor and measure, which would help with your judgment. So ideally, you make better and better decisions going forward. So hopefully, I am excited about the opportunity to continue using my experience with even more and more data to help guide that judgment.
Yeah, we're constantly refining and learning new things, and it kind of comes out of that spirit of the Anarchist Wine Co. next generation winemaking, right? And so it's really exciting when kind of discovering the platforms for being able to take a look at tannin polymerization and equating it to numbers as opposed to gut instinct. So I think it's a really cool opportunity for the future. Thank you for that, and congratulations to everyone who nailed extended maceration. And you get to go out to recess a few minutes early, which I'm sure you're really excited about. Hey, I'm going to bring the screen share up one more time because we're going to pivot into some action items on that you are now responsible for. And let me kind of move past here. We're going to start off with the to-don't list. The to-don't list. As we approach the holidays, it's really important to plan ahead. I don't want you to be December 18th, Doug. And what I mean by that, do not reach out on the 18th and try to have your wine arrive to that very important client by the 25th, because the warehouse and the carriers are both going to experience delays, and they remove that guaranteed arrival date. And especially since a lot of the warehouses are not temperature controlled, it can really compromise the wine. So the drop dead date for the winter holidays, we're saying, is December 14th. And before you start pouting and shouting and Santa gets mad, you just have to plan ahead. So that means communicate with your clients right now so that those orders can get in, or your friends and family, right? It's better safe than sorry. And then there's always this kind of, a lot of people are like, well, it's so much less expensive to ship via ground. But in winter, I don't want you to be Duluth Dan or Detroit Dawn, because cold weather definitely ruins the wine and it will push the corks out. So it can really kind of turn into a very expensive and heartbreaking proposition. So pay attention to the weather, do preemptive strikes, ship now, get organized. Just so you're not running in, we just want to avoid stress on everybody's part because there's multiple parties involved. And we've also just noticed that starting the pandemic, shipping became just much more problematic. The carriers were just kind of overwhelmed. And let me kind of move on to the next thing. Here's your to-do. That was your to-don'ts. I want to kind of finish with a little more positive here. For those people, if you have a 2020 Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, Merlot, or Hardy Red Blend, it's really important to start your labels or schedule your blending session. That was unfortunate. I'm gonna send that little link out to do scheduling. I'll put it in the chat screen for you in just a minute. So 2020 Franc, Cab Sauv, Merlot, Hardy Red Blends. 2021, if you're still waiting on your Grenache, Pinot, Red Blends. Sorry, I didn't put a comma in there. Syrah, Sangio, or Zin. It's time to get started now. And then 2022s, we're already moving into the whites and rosé area. So Gewurz, Rosé, Pinot Gris, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Vio, because we're really going to be looking to blend those starting the second, third week of January and get everything kind of done by March so you can be selling as and have those wines in the marketplace, or just you can have them just as temperatures warm, if you will. So that's if you have any questions about that, you can kind of chime in, or you can get me offline and we'll get you taken care of there. You've probably seen me sipping over here. I am exploring as we kind of shift into, we've been tasting a lot of the rosés. Patrick, with I think rosé is kind of misunderstood or whatever a little bit, but traditionalists would say that you use wacky grapes. I mean, look, we use Tempranillo, Mourvedre, and Grenache is kind of the foundation wines, where even though you do the Provençal or the Tavellian method of traditional approaches, you use grapes that are not traditional. Can you shed light into the intent behind that? And we've had a lot of success, but why Tempranillo, or why Mourvedre, or why Grenache?
So thanks for that question. So these wines are made into rosé in the regions that they are grown in Europe. They, in Spain, they make rosé out of Tempranillo, and they make in France, they make rosé out of Grenache and Mourvedre. However, they don't blend those together, and so then they're not allowed to, actually, and so they don't have the flexibility to, even if something could go really well together, they can't. They're not. Their dad said they weren't allowed to do it. Their granddad said that. So tradition dictates that they cannot do it, and law actually dictates that they cannot do anything that was not already approved upon. Here, of course, it's all market driven, and so we can decide for ourselves, and the market can decide what's great or not great. So we have a lot of flexibility to experiment. And so the only way, so these varieties separately, individually, make great rosés. So do they make a great rosé together? Well, you have to try it. You have to try it at different levels and ratios to see what's the right combination. But on paper, Tempranillo, and in reality, Tempranillo, which is this one, brings wonderful acidity and a juice acidity and vibrancy to the wine. The wine comes off as is a little bit leaner and fresher and vibrant, particularly when you pick it at lower bricks, at 21 to 23 bricks. And so it's kind of, to me, the kind of the foundation of the rosé. I think this is probably the most. However, it's a bit, only as is. It's to me, it's not complex enough to be worthy of your palate. So I want even more layers and complexity. So this is where the Grenache and the Mourvedre come into it. Mourvedre, actually, this Mourvedre, I'm picking up a lot of anise and kind of a savory kind of note to it. It makes the wine rounder. Interestingly, even though it's very light in color, it's kind of a golden color. It makes the wine rounder and fuller across from side to side. And the Grenache, which has very little color, almost looks like a white wine. It is a it adds a layer of delicacy and complexity that we just don't have without it. And so these are probably be in smaller amounts to the Tempranillo. However, it doesn't don't underestimate the impact they have and the importance of them, because they all bring something to the ensemble. And so this is something that's important to understand about wine in general. And here, and I do want to, and we have our own brand, of course, Anarchist Wine Co., as you know, and we like to challenge people's notions of what they think is correct. And so I don't want to do anything that I think is inappropriate. However, these are completely appropriate. These work very well together. They just weren't grown side by side by side. So in Europe, they don't do it that way. It's because it's not the way that they were taught how to do it. Here, I think we take the best of what tradition will teach us, and we can add on to it. So we have to me, we're in a luxury position. And so by default, again, close your ears for all the Europeans. The wines from here are going to be even that much better, because we have flexibility to fill in and do things perhaps a touch differently. Now, because it's different or non-traditional doesn't necessarily mean it works. That's where experiments come in. So some things don't work, and some things work really well. So you have to try it at different levels. You have to try perhaps different regions for different grapes if it's not working to what you're looking for. And so there's a number of ways to get home, as my father used to tell me. And so this one is, I think that if you've ever had the rosé from us, you will. I would hope that you would agree with me that it's a super fun and vibrant and delicious wine, very fresh, and particularly the younger it is. So I also recommend to you, as a side note, for those that have rosé and make rosé or drink rosé, particularly if you agree with my assessment of what makes a rosé the best, the vibrancy and youthfulness and freshness of the wine, younger equals better. And so you have to experiment for yourself to know what your palate tells you is correct. But my palate tells me that rosé is a more of a sprint than a marathon wine, and so I think of it as a 1-year wine. So I think that, the 22 vintage of rosé will be best in 2023, and so I would encourage you to have a sense of urgency with your consumption on the rosé, or on the sales side of rosé. If you're selling rosé, it is very, very fast to me. And it's not just rosé, it's all light whites. So this is, even if it's pink, I consider this a white wine. It's just happened to be made. A rosé, of course, is a white wine made with red grapes. And so just like an orange wine is a red wine made with white grapes. And so the thing about white wines in general, especially non-Chardonnay whites for the most part, is if we had to broad stroke, even though I told you not to do that, I will broad stroke and tell you younger is almost always better. So Sauvignon Blanc and white blends and light whites in general, the reason why it's better is because the freshness is what draws people to the wine itself. And so you want to play to its strength. If its strength is youthfulness and freshness, then have that sense of urgency. And so I tell my wife this all the time: we need to drink this rosé tonight because I'm urgent. I have a sense of urgency with this bottle. So if you do that every single night, and then unfortunately it's a little bit of crying wolf, but I cry the rosé wolf most nights. This one is it's quite lovely. Stuart, what are your thoughts on the wines?
So the super light Tempranillo, sorry about that, super light and lean, and almost like a pear quality about it. So it's less overtly fruity, and then the Grenache, definitely more of a fruit thing, and it's still light but adds a little bit of weight. And then I guess climbing the ladder, the Mourvedre, wow, I mean there's a lot of layers going on there. I don't know really how to describe it, but I like, without hyperbole, talking in broad strokes, I think what's cool about 2022 is that since we also source from more vineyards specifically for rosé, having gone through kind of playing with the preliminary blending trials, like, could be the most complex. I don't know. I don't want to talk about in superlatives, but I feel like it's going to be the most complex rosé that we've created, just because we have a lot of spices with which to play. Is that a fair thing to say? I guess.
Yeah, I agree with you, Stu. I think that this really is going to be a fun vintage. I mean, I love rosé, so I look forward to it every year. However, we have, in the quantity I have to work with this year is even and sometimes I'm a little bit limited on, so I have to be as creative as possible. But I'm less limited this year on the the volumes to work with. So it really boils down to trying it a lot of different ways, and then there's an old video of me going through on the anarchist of me trying like 40 wines in a row on a fast set. You really have to try it a lot of different ways, multiple times, to make sure that's correct, Rada. And so it's important to just experiment. And so the only way to know until how something works is to try it at different levels and to question other people as well. We bring in the whole team here. Stu is a big portion of the winemaking team as well. Cindy and Paco and Matt and Ron and all the people on the team contribute to it. And I ask everyone, I'm a bit of an interrogator and why things work or don't work for everybody. And I need to take in all the data and information to be able to help form my opinion correctly, to be able to make good judgment. We did have a couple of questions, Stu, from that came in. One of them earlier.
Yeah. So I saw Tracy.
Mitch had a question earlier. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
From Tracy, was that the one you were referring to?
I was going back to Mitch had a comment earlier on about the vintage. I'll just go ahead and answer it real quick while we do it. He asked if there were any varieties that did better, or if it was 22 was a better, for certain varieties. And I'd say, Mitch, that just like I kind of, to go back to my comment before, it kind of depends. I'd say that this was probably, it depends on when you picked and where you were and how the vines, what the condition of this, the water content in the vine, all the things, all the detail, the devil's definitely in the details. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of to broad stroke it like that, to say that, oh, this was a Cabernet vintage, or this was a Sauvignon Blanc kind of vintage. I think it's so. I guess so. I'm sounding like a politician. I'm going to say that it was a bit of an everything kind of vintage, but it doesn't mean that all Sauvignon Blanc or all Cabernet Sauvignon turned out excellent. It all depended on the farming and how you did. This was this year. I think you'll see for wines that didn't go well. I'd say that the farming / winemaking didn't respond as well to wines that did. And so just like that, it's no different than any vintage, though. It's always the case. Some vintages are a little bit more difficult. I do think the heat spike was a little bit challenging for the number of people to deal with. And so it really depends on the conditions around that particular thing. So it's, I guess that was kind of a partial answer, but
yeah, it just depended if people had access to water and then the timing. And thankfully, we're fortunate to work with very professional growers, right, who understand the implications. And but we also make wine for a lot of people who bring their own grapes here. And so, we got very lucky working with the quality of the vineyards that they were. A lot of people are like, oh, you shouldn't water, but it's like, well, if it's going to be 116 degrees, you have
definitely water. Definitely water.
So otherwise, the vines are going to poop out. And so things kind of carried through there. Hey, I promised everybody 30 minutes, Patrick.
Yeah, I know. We were like,
not an
so
hour.
Let's quickly answer a couple last questions. And so one other question was from Tracy about Thanksgiving wines. And so real fast note on all wines, regardless of the day, I think it's fun to try different things, particularly if you're not sure about it. You should always just try it, but stick to what you feel is right. So the right answer. I'm not a believer in food and wine pairings, only Pinot Noir only with salmon. Like if you like white wine, you drink white wine with salmon. Or if you like Cabernet, then you can have it with salmon too. Certain things traditionally go better with according to the experts, but you're the expert for you. So always trust you. Don't listen to what I tell you to do. However, I'm telling you to drink rosé with Thanksgiving. I think Gewürztraminer, that like we make the Anarchist white blend, which is a Gewürz heavy white blend. I think Gewürz is excellent with turkey. Light reds, light to medium reds is fantastic. We did on earlier, we on the radio and we drank our Freudian Slip, which is a fun red blend of Sangio with Pinot and Grenache, and with three white varieties, with Gewürz and Vio and Sauv Blanc in there. And it's just a fun light red blend. I think that would go really well with most things. But when in doubt, going back to my old school self, Pinot Noir is the best wine for everything. And so, but I'm a Pinot head, so I'd use that answer. But really the answer is do what feels right to you. Don't listen to anybody else. If you like it that way, then keep doing it that way.
Hey,